Hello, my name is Jake Smith, and this is my presentation for my server virtualization project for my CITS 255 and CITS 270 classes. So my system description, I have an HP ProLiant DL360P Generation 8 as my system. Here I added a hyperlink for the user guide. It's a 1U rack mount server, so pretty slim, and I have Linux Mint installed on it. For my CPUs, I have two Intel Xeon E5 2650s. Each CPU has 8 cores, 16 threads, and a cache of 20 megabytes. So with dual processors, I have 16 cores, 32 threads, and a cache of 40 megabytes. I have an NVIDIA Quadro M2000 graphics card. I have 32 gigabytes of DDR3 error correcting code RAM. I have two 300 gigabyte SAS hard drives for 600 gigabytes of total storage. I have two 460 watt power supply units and one 4-port 1 gigabyte Ethernet NIC. So here's a screenshot of the system info. 600 gigabytes of hard drive storage, 32 gigabytes of memory, and here's my processor, that Intel Xeon E5 2650, which I have two of. Here's my operating system as well with Linux Mint 22.2 Cinnamon. Here's some model screenshots. As you can see, I have an HP ProLiant DL360P Generation 8, and here's just that first page of the user guide or the manual. Here's some CPU screenshots. I have an Intel Xeon E5 2650 once again. Each one of those CPUs has 8 cores, 16 threads, and a cache of 20 megabytes. So pretty good specs overall. Here's some photos of my server. Here's just a plain photo of the outside with it fully put together. And here's a picture of the inside. You can see on the top left I have my power supplies. Here's my GPU right there. Here's my row of RAM with my 1 and 2 CPUs in between. I have my hard drive bay down here, and here are all of my fans right there. So overall a pretty good build. I definitely like it so far. Here's some photos of my GPU that I had to buy. It's the only change that I made to my server because my CPUs did not have integrated graphics. So I had to go out, I had to purchase an external a GPU so I could finally have graphics. But I ended up with an NVIDIA Quadro M2000, pretty good overall. As you can see, I have 4 display ports, so no problems at all. So for my system budget, I originally had a budget of $300, so I wanted to buy stuff on eBay to make everything that I was looking for cheap and reliable. But also I knew that all of my products would be used. I also needed a GPU as well, as my CPU didn't have integrated graphics, as I explained before, so I looked on eBay for that again, and found a nice $40 GPU, along with my $170 rack mount server. So in total I spent $210, which was well below my $300 budget, which I believe is a plus. Next we'll come to the trade-offs. So price versus performance. As I explained earlier, I found a pretty affordable server within the secondary market, but I know that the performance can take a toll, as my server only supports older CPU architecture like the Intel Xeon E5 2600 series and DDR3 RAM, which shouldn't be a problem for me overall with what I need to do for my job, but overall I know that it can have some hindrance on newer architecture. Next up is the size versus the noise. The 1U rack mount server makes for easy scalability without being too big. Definitely is nice to have that scalability upside with the rack mount server versus a workstation server. But with the rack mount server, the fans are very loud and the heat dissipation can be quite intense. I can concur with the server being in my room. The fans are quite loud indeed, and my room can definitely heat up a couple degrees whenever my server's on. But for scalability, I have 24 DIMM slots, which can support up to 768 gigabytes of DDR3 RAM. So very easy scalability, but I know I will definitely not need that much RAM in the future. But sadly, it only has 2 PCIe slots, so decisions on what to use them for must be considered very carefully. And I already am using one of the 2 PCIe slots, as my GPU that I bought earlier is taking one of them up. So I only have one more PCIe slot available, so I'll definitely need to consider carefully on what I want to use it on. But since my server is a home lab primarily used for virtualization and VMs, I'm not too worried about the performance and scalability downsides. So with the process of building my server, I started looking on eBay for used servers that were relatively cheap and reliable. I found an HP ProLiant DL360p Generation 8 that fit my needs, so I bought it, waited around a week, and got it in the mail finally. I plugged everything in and fired it up, just to be met with a black screen. I figured either the VGA port or the cord was faulty, so I tested both, but both were fine. After doing some research, I found out that my CPUs did not have integrated graphics, so I searched on eBay for a GPU that fit my server. I found an NVIDIA Quadro M2000, so I bought it. Had to wait another week, sadly, before it came in the mail, though. But in the meantime, I borrowed a friend's graphics card so I could set up my server. I installed that temporary GPU, fired up the server, and I could finally see graphics on my screen. After that, the server booted up and went through post, but it couldn't enter into the OS. After lots of troubleshooting, I found out that the RAID controller was loose and needed to be reseated. So apparently during transit, my RAID controller came just a bit unseated, so I pressed it back in. After I did that, there were no post problems, and my server loaded into the OS flawlessly, which at the time was Windows Server 2012. But after I loaded into the OS, I knew I wanted a different OS installed besides Windows Server 2012. So I plugged in a USB drive with Linux Mint loaded onto it and installed that OS onto my server. I powered through all of the installation prompts and loaded into the OS, and I finally had a fully working server with no problems and a fully updated Linux Mint OS. I thought I was in the clear until I looked at my hard drives. It turns out my two hard disks were configured into a RAID 5 array, making it where I only had one logical drive when I needed two separate hard drives for my VMs. I booted into the RAID array and deleted the logical drive, but unfortunately that deleted all of the data from my server, including Linux OS, which I just newly installed. After the deletion, I reinstalled Mint, and my server setup was just about complete, but after waiting a couple more days, my original GPU, my NVIDIA Quadro M2000, sorry about that, that finally came in the mail, so I replaced my friend's borrowed GPU with my new one and had no issues. I finally had a fully working server with no problems. So the capabilities of my server, I'm using VirtualBox as my hypervisor and my virtual machine manager. My host system is Linux Mint, and my three VMs, I have Windows Server 2022, 2019, and 2012. I loaded each VM with two CPUs, 4 gigabytes of RAM, and 50 gigabytes of storage. And I have my OS residing on my first hard drive, while my VMs reside on my second hard drive. So to demonstrate that, I have my three VMs, which are simultaneously running. I have Windows Server 2012 here. Looking good. Over here I have Windows Server 2019. And my third VM, I have Windows Server 2022, which after I log in, we can see that I have installed Active Directory domain services as well. So I have three VMs, one of them has Active Directory installed, and they're all running simultaneously. As you can see, all three have 4 gigabytes of RAM and 2 processors. And we come over here, so we can see I have my two hard drives, my first hard drive with my operating system, and my second hard drive with my virtual machines. So, sorry about that. That should be everything. Thank you for listening to my presentation, and if you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Thank you. Hello, my name is Jake Smith, and here I have my server virtualization project for my CITS 260 Advanced Server class. And here we're just kind of expanding on the capabilities of my server from the CITS 255 and CITS 270 class virtualization projects. So first I updated my system changes and upgrades. I did not make any changes or upgrades to the hardware of my server, but the changes that I did make included changing the OS of two of my VMs to Windows 10 Pro. So previously out of my three VMs, I had Windows Server 2022, Windows Server 2019, and Windows Server 2012 as the OSs installed. I kept my Windows Server 2022, and I changed the OS from my Server 2019 and my Server 2012 to Windows 10 Pro. So now I have my one Server 2022 and my two Windows 10 Pro VMs. Along with that, on my Server 2022 VM, I installed Active Directory domain services along with DHCP, DNS, and VPN features. Here I updated my server capabilities to where my VM2 and VM3 both support Windows 10 Pro now. Well, let's actually look at that. So here I have VirtualBox. I still have the same settings. I have 4 gigs of RAM with my two processors, but I updated my network ports. So my first NIC is attached to NAT just to get internet access, and my second adapter here is attached to the internal network. You come over here with my Windows 10 Pro client VMs. They each have one network adapter connected to the internal network to get internal resources. Here, internal network. Come over here to my disks. I have my first hard drive, which has my Linux Mint operating system. And then I have my second hard drive, which has my 3 virtual machines. Let's actually dive into those virtual machines now. So first I have my Windows Server 2022. I have my domain here. I installed Active Directory domain services. So here my computer name is just domain controller. My domain is jslabs.com. Now I have my two NICs. My first one is attached to NAT, which has DHCP to get the IP address. But then my internal NIC right here, I set the IP to a static IP so it can give out DNS and DHCP functions. We can dive a bit deeper now. I have my Active Directory users and computers. I have my two client VM computers right here, client 1 and client 2. I have my domain controller, and then I have my two users that I added. I have John Jones and Susan Smith who use the two client VMs. I can come over to DHCP. You can see that I have my scope here and my address pool for my VMs, which I created a little static address pool so my VMs can only get the addresses 192.168.1.50 to 192.168.1.99. Come over to DNS. You can see I have my forward lookup zone, jslabs.com. Come over to routing and remote access. See that my domain controller is up and running and the routing and remote access service has ran. I can come over to properties here, IPv4, and show that anyone connecting through a VPN will get a certain static IP address from 192.168.1.150 to 192.168.1.159. So in total, there can only be 10 VPN connections from the static pool address. Then finally, come over to our remote access management. You can see our services and our VPN all up to date. Currently, we do not have any remote clients. But let's see what happens when we actually log into the VPN. Come over here, you can see we have no internet access with our connection. Come over to the VPN, connect. We're all connected, and we have internet access now. Beautiful. We're all connected. Can come to the command prompt to verify. Ooh, that was bad. ipconfig. You can see here this is client 1. This is John Jones who's using the client 1 computer connected to the JS Labs domain. You can see yes, DHCP is enabled. You can see we get our address from our static pool. Starts at .1.50. You can see the DHCP servers 192.168.1.15. You can see that is actually the static address of our domain controller over here, which is exactly what we want. You can see our lease expires in a week, so our lease per IP address is about a week. And we come down to the VPN connection. You can see from the VPN static pool, here's the first address, .1.151. And we can come over to our other user now and replicate it. So you can see we have no internet. Connect to the VPN, through the VPN, sorry. And now we have internet access. Beautiful. Throw an ipconfig. You can see this is client 2. This is going to be Susan Smith. You can see the IPv4 address is .1.51, so it got the second reserved address from that pool. Same thing, you get it for a week. Comes from the same DHCP server from our domain controller. Same thing with the VPN connection. It gets the next available IP address from the pool, and we're looking good. So we can come back over here to our remote access management. Now you can see that we have two connections through the VPN. We have Jones J at JS Labs and Smith S at JS Labs. They use point-to-point tunneling protocol, pretty standard for VPNs. Not the safest, but gets the job done. And you can come over here, throw in one more IP config for our domain controller. You can see this is our first NIC connected to the LAN, connected through NAT, gets the IP address through DHCP. That's the default gateway for the ISP. And then we have our internal network right here, it's static address. And then we have our VPN as well, which it would get the first pool, or I'm sorry, the first address from that pool, that 1.150. And everything is working exactly as intended. So thank you for coming and listening to my presentation. And if you have any questions, feel free to let me know in the comments. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of your day.